My family thought it would be hilarious to leave me stranded in another state. Let's see if he finds his way back. They laughed as they drove off. I never made it back. 15 years passed before they found me. 107 missed calls. The summer I turned 22 was supposed to be ordinary. I was working at my dad's hardware store for crap wages. Still living at home because college wasn't an option according to the banks and, of course, my father. I was also the family punching bag, a role I played perfectly next to my golden boy brother, Alan. We weren't exactly poor, but we sure weren't the kind of people who went on Disney vacations either. So when the banks decided we were going on a road trip to my uncle's wedding in Colorado, I should have known something was off. 3 days into that hellish journey, I was already kicking myself for not inventing some excuse to stay behind. My dad and Alan had been playing their favorite game, make Salvador miserable. Mom, Irene, would occasionally murmur that's enough in that feeble tone of hers, but everyone knew she didn't mean it. I need to explain something about my family. Banks wasn't your everyday lousy father. He was the kind who'd yank you out of bed at 3 in the morning to scream about a chore you missed. Who'd toss your belongings if they were in his way. Who'd been telling me I was useless since I could process language. Alan caught on fast. Either become Dad's clone or end up like me. You can guess which route he picked. That morning, we pulled into some nowhere rest stop in Colorado. Middle of absolute nothing. Just empty fields, distant mountains, and a depressing little building with bathrooms and a couple of vending machines. I'd been passed out in the back of our Suburban and needed to stretch my legs. Hit the bathroom. Dad and Alan were laughing about something, and Mom was checking her makeup in the mirror on the visor. I remember exactly what I had on. A faded Metallica shirt, jeans with a ripped knee, and my beat-up Vans I'd worn for years. I didn't bring my phone. It was charging in the car. No wallet either. Why would I? We were in the middle of nowhere. And I was just taking a quick bathroom break. 10 minutes, maybe less. When I stepped outside, blinking into the Colorado sun, the parking spot was empty. Our dark green Suburban had vanished. At first, I thought they'd moved it. Just another dumb prank. I walked around the entire rest stop. That's the thing about betrayal when it comes from your own blood. It cuts deeper than anything else. I sat there for an hour on the curb, convincing myself they were just trying to scare me and would be back any minute. People came and went. A few shooting me curious glances. A trucker asked if I was okay. I lied and told him I was waiting for my girlfriend who was in the bathroom. He nodded and drove off. By the second hour, that cold knot in my stomach had taken hold. They weren't coming back. My first instinct was to borrow a phone, call them, beg them to turn around. I almost approached a mom with 2 kids. But something made me stop. A lifetime of memories hit me all at once. Every humiliation. Every time they laughed at me like it was a game. Every joke that was just cruelty wearing a smile. I could practically hear them. Alan's voice, full of smug delight. Betty's crying right now. My dad's gruff indifference. He'll figure it out if he's not as dumb as he looks. And my mom's soft, useless protest that never made a difference. So I made a choice. I went to that mom and asked to use her phone, but I didn't call my family. I called information and asked for the number of the nearest shelter in Grand Junction, about 40 miles away. Then I asked if she might give me a ride into town. I told her there had been a family emergency and they'd had to leave, but someone would be picking me up later. She hesitated, but I must have looked harmless enough because she said yes. That first night at the shelter hit hard. I had nothing except the clothes on my back. No ID. No cash. No one to call. The guy who ran the place, Dave, let me use their computer to look up my uncle's address from the wedding invite I'd seen. I thought maybe I could find him there. Crash the wedding. But as I sat in front of the screen, a question hit me. Why? Why chase after people who left me on the side of the road like a joke? Instead, I created a new email account. I searched for ways to replace lost ID. I looked up cash under the table jobs. I made a plan. 2 days later, I was washing dishes at this tiny diner called Sonny's. The owner, Geraldine, was this 60-something woman with gray hair streaked purple and more tattoos than I could count. I just walked in, asked if they needed help, told her my wallet got stolen, but I was willing to work. She looked me over and said, "Dishwasher quit yesterday. Steal from me, and you're dead. Start now." That's the thing about rock bottom. There's nowhere to go but up. For a week, I pulled doubles, slept at the shelter, wore whatever clothes they had in the donation bin. Dave helped me start the paperwork for a new ID by contacting vital records back in my home state. With the first cash I made, I bought a cheap prepaid phone from Walmart. 7 days after they left me behind, my phone rang. Unknown number. I picked up. It was my mother, her voice trembling. She asked where I was, if I was okay. Said they'd been looking everywhere. Lies. She claimed it was meant to be a joke. More lies. Said they waited down the road for 20 minutes. That they came back and couldn't find me. Lie after lie after lie. I sat there, listening to her fake panic, her voice cracking with pretend concern. In the background, I heard my father telling her to tell me to stop being dramatic and get to Uncle Rick's already. I heard Alan laughing. Salvador, are you there? Say something. We've been worried sick. But that cold weight in my stomach had disappeared. What replaced it was crystal clear resolve. You wanted to see if I could make it on my own, I said. My voice didn't shake. So watch me. I ended the call. Blocked the number. Then I blocked every other number I could remember. Just to be sure. I walked into a Verizon store the next day and changed my number completely. By then, they'd already tried 27 more times. I imagined their growing rage as they realized their favorite punching bag had slipped out of reach. A month later, I was living in a studio apartment above a laundromat. It was cramped and always smelled like fabric softener. But it was mine. I'd earned it. I'd been promoted to prep cook at Sonny's. And Geraldine had started teaching me how to slice onions without taking a fingertip off. Every now and then I'd check my old email, the one they still had. The inbox was flooded. Messages from my mom begging me to come home, saying they were sorry. From my father, declaring that this childish stunt had gone on long enough. From Alan, calling it just a joke. Telling me to stop being such a pussy. I never replied. Not once. That's the thing about freedom. Once you've had a taste, the thought of going back to the cage is unbearable. I won't pretend it was easy. Some nights I'd scroll through Instagram, see people with families who actually cared, and I'd feel that hollow ache no amount of bitterness could fill. There were nights where the silence wrapped around me like a vice. Holidays were the hardest, but every morning I'd wake up in that crummy little apartment that smelled like dryer sheets. Head off to a job where nobody called me a failure, and lay one more brick in the life I was building from scratch. 3 months after they left me at that rest stop, I checked my email one final time. A new message sat at the top from my mother. Your grandmother is asking about you. Please just let us know you're alive. I closed the tab, deleted the account, tossed my old SIM card in the dumpster behind Sonny's. That night, Geraldine showed me how to make her famous apple pie. Said I had good hands for pastry. It was the first real compliment I could remember getting in years. I never looked back. Update 1. 5 years after they abandoned me in Colorado, I was scrolling through Facebook and stopped cold at a familiar face. Not because I was actively checking in on them. Maybe I was. But because Alan had just been tagged in a local news article from back home. He'd gotten a DUI, wrapped his car around a telephone pole. The only casualty was the pole. The newspaper used his high school football photo. He looked young, cocky, untouched. Nothing like the bloated mugshot sitting just below it. That's the thing about karma. It moves slow, but it always knows where you live. By that point, I built something close to a real life out here in Colorado. My little studio above the laundromat had been replaced with a one-bedroom that had windows and heat that worked more than half the time. I'd gone from dishwasher to line cook to assistant manager at Sonny's. Geraldine still ran the place with that perfect mix of iron will and powdered sugar. But she treated me less like a charity case and more like whatever the word is for family you choose instead of get stuck with. When I finally had savings that felt real, I bought a laptop. Nothing flashy, just good enough to take community college courses online. Business management. Intro accounting. The stuff banks used to say was for people too dumb for real work. I'd work mornings at Sonny's. Study in the afternoons. Head back for the dinner rush. Day in, day out. Look, I won't pretend I'd fully healed. My trust issues weren't just issues. They were entire service plans, complete with cancellation clauses the moment anyone got too close. I'd made exactly 2 friends in 5 years. My neighbor Duck, who played bass in a garage band that sounded like someone arguing with a lawnmower, and sometimes brought over homemade beer that tasted like hoppy dishwater. And Geraldine, if she even counted as a friend and not just my boss. That changed when Kendra started coming into Sonny's. Every Tuesday and Thursday, like clockwork. Always ordered the same thing, Denver omelet. No tomatoes, extra coffee. She'd sit at the counter with a textbook open, eyes locked and like the rest of the world didn't exist. Med school, I found out later. She had this habit of zoning out so hard she'd forget she was mid-bite. Fork in hand, cold eggs untouched. I started timing her once. 7 minutes and 23 seconds was the record before she blinked and realized breakfast had gone cold. It took 4 months of coffee refills before she actually looked up and noticed me. I mean, really noticed me. Her eyes did this little flicker thing. Then she said my name tag was spelled wrong. It wasn't. But that became our thing. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I wore a different wrong name. She'd call it out. I'd act surprised. Stupidest form of flirting ever invented, but it worked. Our first date wasn't even meant to be one. Her study group bailed last minute, and she had this impossible-to-get reservation at a pizza place across town. I happened to be wiping down the counter when her phone buzzed. One cancellation text later, we were awkwardly sitting across from each other at Antonio's, both pretending we didn't notice how much it looked like a date. 6 months after that, she moved into my place. A year later, we upgraded to a slightly bigger apartment. Just a simple 2-bedroom where the toilet didn't run all night and the neighbors didn't practice bass solos at 2 a.m. I still kept tabs on my family. Fake accounts, burner emails. Not proud of it, but there it is. Dad's hardware store started tanking after a Home Depot opened on the edge of town. I'd see his angry rants on community Facebook groups, each one more bitter than the last. Mom's profile turned into this curated shrine to family. Throwback photos of all of us grinning. Like those moments hadn't been laced with tension. Posts about missing her boys. Plural. That part always got me. She'd tag Alan, but never once mentioned me. Like I'd been edited out of the story. Alan kept job hopping. His posts were the usual cryptic garbage. Haters this, big things coming that. The digital version of shouting into a void while your life falls apart. 3 years into the new life, Geraldine pulled me aside during inventory. Said she was thinking of opening a second Sonny's across town. Asked if I'd want to run it. Not own it. Run it. There's a difference, and I heard it loud and clear. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking it was some kind of test. Or a joke. People like me didn't get opportunities like that. Banks made sure I understood that much. That's the thing about poison. It lingers. Long after you've crawled away from the snake, it's still in your bloodstream. But I said yes. Because Kendra, half asleep beside me, mumbled I'd be stupid not to. Because Doug, exhaling weed smoke like punctuation, said duh. I basically ran the place already. Because Geraldine wasn't Banks, wasn't my family. And never once made me feel like a piece of shit pretending to be a person. Sonny's East opened 6 months later. Smaller than the original. Different menu. My menu. I worked 90-hour weeks that first year. Dropped 10 pounds I couldn't afford to lose. Fought with Kendra about never being home. Came home to Post-its on the fridge with more sarcasm than ink. But it worked. People came. People came back. The food was solid. The vibe was better. We weren't getting rich, but we weren't drowning either. For years after they left me at that rest stop, I made enough to help Kendra chip away at her med school loans. Not all of them. Those things are financial black holes, but enough to matter. She cried when I showed her the payment receipt. Not some cute, screen-ready crying. Real crying. Snot and hiccups and swollen eyes. I'd never felt more like a human being than in that moment. Then my grandmother died. I found out through Facebook. Mom posted this long dramatic tribute, all hearts and hollow nostalgia. Grandma Rose was the only one who ever stood up to Banks. The only one who ever really saw me. She'd slip me 20s when no one was looking. Whisper to save it for when I needed to get out. I think she meant college. Turns out, it was more literal than she knew. I thought about going to the funeral. Even looked up flights. Kendra said she'd come with me. Said she'd hold my hand through the whole awful mess. Doug offered his beat-up hatchback if I wanted to drive instead. Geraldine just shrugged and said dead people don't know if you're there or not. Do what brings you peace. I didn't go. Sent flowers instead. The kind the funeral home keeps in bulk. Something white and safe and forgettable. Signed the card Salvador. No return address. No note. Just my name. The social media fallout was instant. Mom posting about signs and messages from beyond. Alan dropping cryptic comments about prodigal sons. Banks didn't say anything publicly. But I could picture the storm brewing behind his clenched jaw. A week later, I got a friend request from a name I didn't recognize. No posts. No friends. I was about to delete it until I read the message. Sal, it's Uncle Rick. Your mom gave me your old email, but it bounced. Are you okay? We've been worried. Your dad's been asking around about you. I blocked the account. That night, I had my first panic attack in 2 years. Curled on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m., trying not to wake Kendra. Felt like my lungs had turned to stone. Like Banks was already on his way, hunting me down. Imagined him walking into Sonny's, tearing apart everything I'd built just by being there. Kendra found me an hour later. Didn't ask a single question. Just sat beside me, shoulder against mine. When I could finally breathe again, she said the simplest thing. They can't take anything from you that you don't give them. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Asked about restraining orders. Locked down every privacy setting I could find. Told Geraldine to let the staff know. Nobody gives out information about me. Ever. Little moves. Control what you can. 5 years to the day after they left me at that rest stop, I married Kendra. Small ceremony in a state park. Doug stood beside me in a wrinkled suit. Geraldine made the cake and cried the whole time. Mascara running in rivers down her lined cheeks. Kendra's family loud. Chaotic. Absolutely everywhere. Wrapped me up like I'd always been one of them. Her dad told bad jokes that didn't make me flinch. Her mom hugged me like it was nothing. Like I didn't have invisible spikes under my skin. That's the thing about found family. Sometimes it finds you after you've stopped believing it exists. A week after the wedding. Scrolling my dummy account in the dark, I saw it. A post from Banks on some community page. Looking for information on my son, Salvador. Last known location, Grand Junction, Colorado. Family emergency. There was no emergency. I knew that much. What I didn't know was why, after 5 years of silence, they were suddenly looking for me. So I started digging. Made another fake account. Joined the old community groups. Scrolled through threads, comments, photos. Pieced it together bit by bit. The hardware store was gone. The house was in foreclosure. Mom was vague, booking about medical issues. Alan had moved back in after his third DUI. They weren't looking because they missed me. They were looking because they needed something. And you know what? For the first time in 5 years, I smiled when I thought about them. Not because I enjoyed their unraveling, but because I finally understood something. I didn't care anymore. I closed the laptop, slid into bed next to my sleeping wife, and made a decision. I'd keep watching from a distance. Not out of bitterness, not out of longing, but because sometimes the best revenge isn't about striking back. It's about building something solid while they're too busy burning everything down. Update. It started with a LinkedIn notification. 15 years after they left me at that Colorado rest stop, my carefully built life hit a glitch. Someone viewed my profile 27 times in one day. Not unheard of. Recruiters get weird sometimes. But the name stopped me cold. Alan Matthews. My brother. That's the thing about the past. It's patient. It waits in the tall grass until you're not looking. And by the time it moves, you've changed. My life looked nothing like that first year in Grand Junction. Kendra had finished med school, finished residency, and was working part-time at a local clinic so she could be home with the kids. 2 of them. Ellie, 7. Marcus, 4. We'd traded the apartment over the laundromat for a modest 4-bedroom at the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but it had a yard big enough for tag and failed tomato plants. Sonny's had grown. 3 locations now. Not a franchise, not some empire, but enough that I wasn't on the line every day, only when someone called in sick. Geraldine had semi-retired 2 years ago, though she still dropped by unannounced to critique our crust technique. I thought I'd made peace with the past. I still checked in from time to time, but the habit had dulled to every few months at most. Last I heard, Banks and Irene had downsized after losing the house. Alan had cycled through a marriage, a divorce, and another marriage. They seemed to have moved on, just as I had. But the LinkedIn thing shook something loose. 15 years of silence, and then this? I mentioned it to Kendra during our usual Sunday night ritual, folding laundry, half watching whatever Netflix series we were lagging behind on. She paused mid-fold, a mismatched sock in each hand, and asked if I was okay. I nodded. What else could I say? That suddenly I was 22 again, stranded at a rest stop, heart thudding in my ears. That I could still hear Banks's voice in my head calling me worthless? 3 days later, I was at Sonny's East, our second location. The original expansion, helping with inventory because our supplier had, once again, sent the wrong filters for the coffee machine. Maya called back from the front. Said there was some family asking for me. My first thought was Kendra's parents. They had a habit of surprising us if they were driving through town. I headed to the front. already mentally preparing to talk them into staying for dinner. It wasn't Kendra's family. Banks stood there, older, dimmed, his once commanding frame diminished, clothes hanging on him like they didn't fit quite right. Irene looked brittle and tight, like she'd been clenched for years. Her hair dyed a shade of brown that didn't exist in nature. And Alan looked like Banks at 40. Same posture, same way of owning the space around him like it owed him something. There was a woman I didn't recognize. Early 20s, maybe. She stood slightly behind Alan, eyes darting, uncertain whether she belonged in this scene. No one said anything. The noise of the lunch rush melted into a dull hum. All I could hear was the steady thump of my own heartbeat in my ears. Banks spoke first. Said my name like a question. I nodded. My voice had packed up and left without warning. I'd pictured this moment 1,000 different ways. In some, I tore into them, scorched earth. In others, I was cool and detached, untouchable. In a few shameful versions, there were hugs and tears and forgiveness. But reality is always messier than the script you write in your head. I gestured toward an empty table in the corner, told Maya to bring waters, sat down across from the people who used to be my family, and waited. They'd found me through a magazine article. Rocky Mountain Rising, 10 local success stories. It wasn't even a main feature. Just a sidebar, a photo of me standing in front of the original Sunnies. One of Mom's old high school friends had seen it, sent her a screenshot with a casual, "Isn't this your son?" 107 missed calls. That's how many they said they'd made to my old number before it was disconnected. Mama kept count. She said it like it was supposed to matter. They talked over each other. Irene with her performance of worry. Banks insisting I'd misunderstood what happened that day. Alan leaning in like we were just two guys catching up over coffee. The young woman, Alan's second wife. Poppy sat quiet. Watched me like she was studying a subject she didn't quite know how to name. I let them talk. Let them unravel. Listen to the version of the story where they weren't the villains. I noticed the way Banks kept scanning the restaurant, eyes moving across the floor, the counters, the register, quietly running numbers in his head, trying to guess its worth. Saw how Mom's hand trembled ever so slightly when she reached for her water, a ghost of control slipping. Watched Alan's polished charm falter whenever he thought I wasn't looking. When the noise of their excuses and half-explanations finally dried up, I asked the only question that mattered. Why now? The answer came in fragments. Uneasy silences filled the spaces where pride used to live. Banks had mounting medical bills, heart issues, no insurance. The second house, the one they'd bought after losing the first, was in foreclosure. Alan's latest business scheme, something hazy and half-baked involving cryptocurrency, had gone under in spectacular fashion. Mom needed knee surgery but couldn't afford it. They hadn't come for closure. They'd come for money. I should have been furious. Should have stood up, told them to get out, to never come back. But instead, something softer took hold. Pity. They looked small, hunched, faded. These towering figures who had once loomed over every inch of my world were now just tired, broken people, clinging to whatever they thought I might give them. So I told them I'd think about it, that I'd talk to Kendra, and I invited them to dinner. They agreed without hesitation, Banks already looking smug, like the matter had been settled. That afternoon felt like a dream I wasn't fully awake in. I picked Ellie up from dance, helped Marcus prep for his preschool show and tell, all while quietly texting Kendra updates about who would be showing up at our front door. She offered to take the kids to her sister's place. I told her no. I wanted them there. I wanted my family to meet my family. Dinner was chicken enchiladas. My go-to. Nothing fancy, just a recipe from the back of an old El Paso box that I'd been slowly improving over the years. Ellie set the table without being asked, placing the forks on the wrong side until Kendra gently adjusted them. Marcus refused to change out of his Spider-Man costume because it was Tuesday. And apparently Tuesday was Spider-Man Day now. When the doorbell rang, my hand shook just enough to almost drop the baking dish. Kendra passed behind me, gently touched my arm. Whispered that she had my back, always. The kids looked up, instinctively sensing something significant was about to unfold. That's the thing about moments you've dreaded for years. When they finally arrive, they're somehow both messier and more ordinary than you imagined. Introductions were stiff. Banks kept calling Kendra Karen, no matter how many times she corrected him. Irene couldn't stop crying every time she looked at the kids, which was starting to freak Marcus out. Alan and Poppy were the least unbearable of the bunch. Making real efforts to hold normal conversation, though Alan kept slipping in those not-so-subtle hints about family helping family. After dinner, Kendra took the kids upstairs for baths and bedtime, pausing just long enough to give me a look that clearly meant text if you need an extraction. Then it was just me and them, sitting in a living room that suddenly felt too tight, too crowded. Banks launched into it, his pitch, polished from practice. Talked about how family sticks together. Said he'd always believed I'd make something of myself. A lie. All they needed was a little help to get back on their feet. $20,000. Just a loan, of course. I let him finish. Then I asked if he remembered what he said to me on my 18th birthday. He stared back, blank. So I reminded him. At least you can't disappoint me anymore once you're not legally my problem. I turned to Mom, asked if she remembered what she did when Banks tossed my acceptance letter to community college in the trash. She said nothing then, and she said nothing now. I looked at Alan. Asked if he remembered telling my first girlfriend I was probably a faggot anyway, when she came looking for me. He flinched. They all shifted uncomfortably. The excuses started. The rewriting of history. Banks began to get that sharpness in his tone, that threat woven through his words, the same one that used to make me shrink. But I wasn't shrinking. Not anymore. I was 15 years and a whole different life away from that scared kid. I stood, walked to my office, came back with an envelope, and handed it to Banks. He opened it, confused. Stared at the check inside. $73.50. He asked what the hell this was supposed to mean. I told him. In 2010. That was the exact cost of a one-way Greyhound ticket from Grand Junction to our hometown. The price of coming home from the place they left me. Silence settled over the room like snowfall. Then Banks exploded. Started shouting. Called me ungrateful. Selfish. Said I'd always been a disappointment. The greatest hits of my childhood on full volume. One last time. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't argue. I stood and told them it was time to go. Mom switched tactics, tears, guilt. How could I do this to family? Alan went cold. The friendly brother act dropped completely. Poppy looked like she wished she were anywhere else. When they finally left, Banks crumpling the check and tossing it onto the front step, I closed the door and leaned against it. Legs weak. Breathing unsteady. Kendra came downstairs. I, searching my face, asked if I was okay. I nodded. Couldn't trust my voice yet. We cleaned up the dishes in silence. Checked on the kids, both sound asleep. Moved through the bedtime routine like it was any other night. But it wasn't. As I was setting the security system, I pulled up the front door camera on my phone. They were still in the driveway. Arguing. Banks gesturing wildly. Mom crying. Alan staring at our house with a look I knew all too well. Envy tinged with hatred. Eventually, they got into their rental car and drove off. I've never seen or heard from them again. And I don't expect to. That chapter is closed. That's the thing about revenge. The best kind isn't something you dish out. It's something you live. Every laugh with my kids. Every quiet Sunday with nothing to fear. Every shared look with Kendra across a messy kitchen. Every single ordinary day in a life I built from the ground up on my terms. I never made it back home. I did something better. I built one. If this story hit close to home, or if you just couldn't look away, there's more where that came from. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, where the past and present collide, and the truth is never as simple as it seems.